Good evening, everyone. It is good to have you out with us. Trust that you had a wonderful, blessed, balmy day today. Beautifully warm temperatures. All right. Oh, all right. Well, let's turn to 511. We'll turn to 511. And if you're able, please stand and we'll sing together this evening. Now I belong to Jesus, not for the years of time alone, but for eternity. 511. Jesus, my Lord, will love me forever. From him no power of evil can sever. He gave his life to ransom my soul. Now I belong to him. Now I belong to Jesus. Jesus belongs to me. Not for the years of time alone, but for eternity. Once I was lost in sin's degradation. Jesus came down to bring me salvation, lifted me up from sorrow and shame. Now I belong to him. Now I belong to Jesus. Jesus belongs to me. Not for the years of time alone, but for eternity. Joy floods my soul, for Jesus has saved me, freed me from sin that long had enslaved me. His precious blood he gave to redeem. Now I belong to him. Now I belong to Jesus. Jesus belongs to me. Not for the years of time alone, but for eternity. You may be seated.
Good evening. Welcome to South Hills Baptist Church in Cary/Raleigh, North Carolina. Just depends on your perspective where we are. I have a couple of videos that I wish to show you tonight. They're from my favorite archaeologist, Brother Kramer, Joel Kramer, who I believe was a pastor at one time out in Utah. Certainly, he's always been very active in his church. He is a strong Christian, and usually at the end of his archaeological explanations of the programs, he'll throw in the gospel also. But the first video that I'd like to show you is it's a short video, and it's about the bears of Israel. And it's just really interesting because the climate and apparently the vegetation of Israel has changed a great deal in the last 3,000 years. And you will recall that when Abraham and Lot decided to part ways, Lot picked out this area down by the Dead Sea, or in that general region. He said it's like the Garden of God. Well, it ain't that way today, I can tell you. I think you're aware of that. So, Brother Bowden, if you'll commence with the first video, please.
I want to explore what kind of bears are the bears in the Bible. Now, there are two bear encounters recorded in Scripture, and the first one is told to us by David when he was shepherding. And he says, "When a bear came and carried off a sheep from the flock, I went after it, struck it, and rescued the sheep from its mouth. When it turned on me, I seized it by its hair, struck it, and killed it." The second encounter was when the prophet Elisha went up to Bethel. And boys from Bethel were making fun of his baldness, so he called a curse down upon them. And it says that 2 bears came out of the woods and mauled 42 of the boys. So these are very aggressive bears. Now, these 2 encounters happened, one in the area of Bethlehem, because that's where David is from, and the other near Bethel. And both of these towns are located in the high country of Israel. There is a mountain ridge that goes like a backbone north to south down Israel, and both Bethlehem and Bethel are located on top of this ridge. And we know that in ancient times, this area was forested. If you'll notice in the Bethel account, it says that these 2 bears came out of the woods. And then there's other examples, like from the book of Joshua, for example, where he tells them to go up into the forest and clear land for yourselves. And he calls this central area of Israel the forested hill country. This is bear country. Now, the question is, what kind of bears lived in ancient Israel? And based on their aggressive behavior, the descriptions in the Bible fit best with the species known as brown bears. And brown bears that live inland and don't really feed on the salmon runs, these are called often grizzly bears. Grizzly bears are brown bears. Now, if thinking about grizzly bears living in ancient Israel surprises you, let's just look at what brown bear distribution is today. The main numbers of brown bears exist today on either side of the Bering Strait. On the western side in Russia, on the eastern side in Alaska, and down into Canada. And they used to exist much further to the south. Take, for example, the flag of California. Why is a grizzly bear on the state flag of California when there are no grizzly bears in California? And of course, the answer is that before things like urbanization or deforestation or the invention of the firearm came into being, there used to be grizzly bears in California. The same is true over on the western side. Brown bears are up in Russia today. They used to exist further south. If you go from California across the globe, you end up in the area of Israel. And just as there used to be grizzly bears in California, there used to be grizzly bears in Israel. In fact, the last recorded sighting of a grizzly bear within the borders of ancient Israel was as recently as 1865. So one of the ways that we know that it was grizzly bears that lived in ancient Israel is that we have them depicted on mosaic floors of Byzantine churches. And these are around 14 to 1500 years old, and they represent the animals that lived locally at the time that they were made. And so we have several examples of these on mosaics, both in the country of Israel and in Jordan. For example, in Israel, there's a bear on a mosaic at the site of Caesarea. If you look at this bear, notice the hump on its back. This protruding hump is the main physical characteristic that distinguishes grizzly bears from other kinds of bears. The black bear, for example, is lacking this protruding hump. Now, why is this important? It's important because we want to have an accurate biblical context, because it adds to the perspective. It's one thing if David is a boy and he's shepherding. It's another thing if he's a boy and he's shepherding in grizzly country. He's not fighting some small, weak bear. He's fighting a grizzly bear. It's a grizzly bear that God is using to prepare him to fight Goliath and everything else that he's calling him to as the king of Israel. Also, bears are used symbolically in the Bible for their flesh eating and for their fierceness. They represent fierce nations. They represent the righteous judgment and wrath of God. And so we want to have an accurate context for that. So thanks to the mosaics of these bears that include the humps on their back, they are easy to identify as grizzly bears. And so to have the right perspective, we need to understand that the bears in the Bible are grizzly bears.
You know, I'd never paid much attention. You can leave the lights off, Brother Jeff. I've never paid much attention to grizzly bears. And that hump on the back, I had just never noticed that before. And yet it seems to be very clear that the bears in Israel at the time of David, the time of the Old Testament, were grizzly bears. That was just a short video, but I found it very interesting, and I bet you didn't know that either, so we'll let that go at that. The next video that I would like to show you is again from our brother Joel Kramer, and it takes us to the site of Peniel. Now, if you read the story, this is where the story of Jacob, when he was returning from Paddan Aram with his 2 wives and all of his children and all of his flocks, and he's going to meet his brother, who you might recall the last time we heard of Esau is he just kept himself in a good mood with the thought of killing Jacob. And so he's going back to face Jacob, and this occurs at a place on the eastern side of the Jordan River in what is Jordan today, the country of Jordan. And there was an encounter there also where Jacob wrestled with a man, and it turns out the man was God. And I've never understood that whole story. I mean, I understand him preparing to meet his brother, but Brother Kramer here takes us to that place, and you see the layout, and then what you read in the Bible makes more sense when you can see the geography. And then in the end, he explains this wrestling with God, something I've never heard from any preacher in all my decades as a Christian going to church. So I think you'll find it interesting, and I believe you'll find the conclusion very enlightening. So, Brother Bowden, if you'll show the second video.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining me. Today I want to talk about a site in the country of Jordan. What a lot of people don't realize is how many incredible biblical sites there are in Jordan. And the one that I want to talk about today is one of the most amazing ancient sites on the face of the earth. Genesis 32:30 says, "So Jacob called the place Peniel." Peniel means face of God. Why did Jacob call this particular place face of God? Well, he tells us, he says, because I saw God face to face, and yet my life was spared. There is an ancient site in the country of Jordan that has long been identified as the biblical site of Peniel. So we are here at the Jabbok River and Peniel. This is my son Barry. And he's going to join me for this camping trip. We're going to backpack up onto Peniel, and we're going to spend the night. So what is the evidence for this identification? Because if we can better understand this place, then it'll help us to better understand the profound event that happened there thousands of years ago. Located north of the Dead Sea and east of the Jordan River is Wadi Zerka, through which flows the Zerka River, which in the Bible is called the Jabbok. Here is the site of Talul Ed Dahab, made up of two hills, the smaller eastern hill and the much larger western hill called Tel Dahab West, which is covered with the ruins of an ancient city. Keep in mind, Peniel and Penuel are two slight variants for the same name. In 1877, the American archaeologist Sella Merrill, while exploring the Jabbok River Valley, wrote in his journal, "As to the site of Penuel, there is but one suitable point on the Jabbok, and that is at Talul Ed Dahab, or Hills of Gold." One reason why the identification was so obvious to Merrill is because Tel Dahab is the most dominating mound of ruins on the lower Jabbok River. Genesis 32:22 says of Peniel that it is located on the ford of the Jabbok, and Tel Dahab is located on the Jabbok, where still today the road crosses the river. Now you might say, okay, well this is just a modern bridge and who cares? But the thing is that these modern roads often follow the ancient routes, and you know that they do because they link these ancient tells together. And so where the modern road crosses the Jabbok River today, right next to Tel Dahab, it goes up to another ancient tell. And so it's logical that this modern route follows the ancient route. So what Sella Merrill is saying here is he's saying that the identification is an easy one. Where Penuel is located is obvious to Sella Merrill in 1877. And it should be all the more easily identified today because since Sella Merrill's day, several archaeological surveys have been done and then excavations of the site have been conducted. So the surveys, we have Nelson Gluck, we have DeVoe, we have more recently Robert Gordon that did a survey there. And then the Antiquity Department for Jordan, along with some European schools, did excavations at the site for 6 seasons between the years 2005 and 2011. Now we need to talk about the archaeology, and something that's very important to talk about is that at the time of Jacob, this is a remote, isolated place. It says that Jacob is left alone there, and so we should not expect anything archaeologically to be left behind from this period. However, something very significant for archaeology happens at this time because Jacob names the place. And since he names the place Peniel, then we can follow Peniel as the Bible continues, as we continue through history, to see what this site becomes later in history. As we move forward, an important period is the Judges period. And we have in Judges chapter 8, Gideon and his men coming to and speaking to the men of Peniel. This means that it is an occupied town during the period of the Judges. And so this is significant, and the archaeological surveys and the excavations found occupation at Tel Dahab during what is called the Iron Age 1 period, and this includes the period of the Judges. So we have a match here between the archaeology of Tel Dahab and the description that we have in Judges chapter 8. If we move even further ahead in time, then we come to 1 Kings 12:25, which says Jeroboam built up Peniel. Jeroboam, if you'll remember, is the first king of the northern kingdom of Israel. We have the divided kingdom, the southern kingdom of Judah, the northern kingdom of Israel, and he's the first king.
So in 1 Kings 12:25, it says that Jeroboam built up Peniel, meaning he fortified Peniel. And so here we have the fortification walls at Peniel, and here the excavation team dug down to the base of these walls, and they found Iron Age 2 pottery, which is the time period that represents the reign of Jeroboam.
And so we have another match here between the archaeology and the biblical description. Located about 5 miles west of Tel Dahab is another ancient mound called Tel Der Allah. Genesis 33 says after leaving Peniel, Jacob went to Sukkoth. Jacob was continuing his journey west to Canaan, and therefore Merrill identified Tel Der Allah as biblical Sukkoth. In Judges chapter 8, Gideon and his men are traveling in the opposite direction. First, they came to the Jordan and crossed it. Then Gideon spoke to the men of Sukkoth before he went up to Peniel on the Jabbok River. The biblical descriptions of these two sites is another reason why it was so obvious to Merrill that Tel Dahab was biblical Peniel. You only have one site that is located on the Jabbok that matches in all these requirements that we read about in the biblical text. And so the identification made all the way back in 1877 by Merrill that Tel Dahab is Peniel is very, very strong, and even stronger today than it was back then. Okay, now that we know the location of Peniel, then we can better understand the account of what happened there. So Jacob is traveling along the Jabbok River with his family and with these large herds. That's why he's following this continuously flowing river. Then he sends messengers out to deliver the message to his brother down in the south in Edom that he is returning. Genesis 32:6 says, when the messengers returned to Jacob, they said, we went to your brother Esau, and now he is coming to meet you, and 400 men are with him. And it says specifically that Jacob's response to this was great fear and distress. Now Jacob is expecting this threat to come in. Now where is he expecting it to come in? So Merrill says when he was traveling on the route that came up from the Jordan Valley up to Peniel, this is 1877, he's riding his horse up this route, that it was on the northern side of the river. Merrill wrote, the road from the west follows up the north side of the river, and that's where the road goes to this day, and this is logically where it was in ancient times. And so Jacob would have been expecting the threat, his brother and the men with him, to come along that road on the north side of the Jabbok, which was on the same side of the river as the site that he would name Peniel. The Genesis 32 account says, that night Jacob got up and took his 2 wives, his 2 female servants and his 11 sons, and crossed the ford of the Jabbok. After he had sent them across the stream, he sent over all his possessions. So Jacob was left alone. So what he does next in his great fear and distress makes a lot of sense. He knows that his brother and the men are coming in on the north side, so he puts his family and his possessions on the south side of the river. He's not a coward. He's not using his family as a buffer between him and the incoming threat. He's doing the opposite.
He's using the river and himself as the buffer in between his family and his brother and the band of men that are coming in with him. So the next thing that Jacob is going to want to do is he's going to want to seek high ground. He's going to want to watch for his brother and the men coming into this area, because he's going to want to get to them before his brother and those men get to his family. And so the high ground on the north side of the Jabbok is the hill of Dahab. And so it's 295 feet above the Jabbok River. And so that's where he goes up to. It makes sense that he goes up on top of a hill. And that's where he's left alone. Now he's up on top of this high place. He can look for his brother. Now what's he going to do next? He's in great fear and distress. What else would he do? What else can he do but pray? Verse 9 says, Then Jacob prayed, O God of my father Abraham, God of my father Isaac, Lord, save me. And what does he pray for? It's a pretty simple prayer, save me. And in response to his prayer for God to save him, this man shows up and wrestles with him until daybreak. It's very strange. And Jacob overcomes this man. He's got him in a lock. And the man says to him, Let me go, for it is daybreak. And Jacob says, I will not let you go until you bless me. Which is strange because that means that he's the greater of the two. It's the greater that blesses the lesser. And the man asks him, What is your name? Jacob. Your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you have struggled with God and with humans and have overcome. Then Jacob says to him, Well, please tell me your name. Why do you ask my name? The man says. And then it says, Then this man blessed Jacob there. And Jacob named the place Peniel because he saw God face to face, and yet his life was spared. The obvious question after all of this is, who is this man? And this man from the account itself is obviously God. If this man isn't God, then why did he name him Israel, which means to struggle with God? If this man wasn't God, then why did Jacob name the place Peniel, which means face of God? Why did he say, because I saw God face to face? All we have to do is go to the prophet Hosea, who makes it very, very clear. He says that when Jacob was a man, he struggled with God and overcame him. He's talking about Peniel, what happened at Peniel. And then he says who this man is. He says, the Lord, all in capital letters, meaning that the 4-letter name of God is found in the Hebrew there, Yahweh. This is the answer to Jacob saying to the man who he wrestled, What is your name? Why do you ask my name? Well, Hosea answers that Yahweh is his name. Derek Kidner, in his commentary of Genesis, explains, when God appears as a man in the Old Testament, he's usually called the angel of the Lord, a title interchangeable with God or the Lord. A study of the angel of the Lord passages leaves no room for doubt that the term denotes God himself as seen in human form. The very first time that Israel is mentioned in the Bible is in Genesis 32, when God changes Jacob's name to Israel. Jacob is the name that his parents gave him at birth. Israel is the name that God gives him at Peniel. This is when the God of his fathers becomes his personal God, where he refers to him as my God, my shepherd. Before Peniel, God was known as the God of Abraham and Isaac. After Peniel, God is known as the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob.
We just had our wrestling match up here, and
I think I won.
Well, the thing is, the only way that Jacob won wrestling God is that God let him win. And so I wanted to pass that blessing along to my son. And so I let him win.
That's what he says.
So the Bible says that Jeroboam built up Peniel. When they did the excavations up here on the summit of Peniel, they found from that time period a temple. And then on the layer above that was a later building. And it had stone columns that were in the shape of hearts. And so you see one right here.
While the excavation report does not give an interpretation of what this building might have been used for, one possibility is intriguing.
Now, what was the purpose of this building? Well, it makes sense, since it was on top of a temple, that it would continue that tradition of this place being a religious place. The religious buildings that come later that have parallels for these heart-shaped columns are synagogues.
And so this book I have here, Ancient Synagogues Revealed, in this book that talks about many of the synagogues in the area have these stone heart-shaped pillars. The one at Capernaum, in fact, all of the synagogues around the Galilee region, with the exception of Chorazin, have heart-shaped pillars in them.
What better place for a synagogue to be built than at Peniel, where Jacob wrestled with God. So in the excavation report, they quote the survey of Robert Gordon that took place in the early 80s. He talks about the Roman and Byzantine pottery up here and says that there was a Roman occupation and a Byzantine presence. And you can see that that is the case because etched into the side of this stone is a definite cross. And so what would Christians be doing coming up to this site? Well, that's what they did. They went on these pilgrimages to these significant biblical places. And so this would be one of those places, the place where Jacob wrestled with God.
So if we really think about what happened to Jacob at Peniel, Jacob was in great fear and distress, and he prayed and asked God, "Save me." And in response, God came down and appeared to him in the form of a man and wrestled with him and took the position of humility in order to bless him there. And this is what God has done for us when we cry out, "Save me." He has provided in the same way. God came down out of heaven. He became a man in the person of Jesus, and he took the place of humility, even death on a cross, in order to bless us, in order to answer our prayer of salvation. This site of Peniel is an amazing site, not because of what it looks like, but because of the profound event that happened there thousands of years ago and what it means to us today. And so I hope it was encouraging to you. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button. I'll leave a link in the description where you can order a copy of my book, Where God Came Down. You can watch more videos here, and thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.
So Brother Joel Kramer is not only an archaeologist, but he's a good teacher. I think he showed us a lot of things in this video of this pile of dirt. I mean, there's just nothing there but dirt and rocks. It is amazing. I must explain something if you're not familiar with this, because I did not know, but a tell is a location of a city or a town. And what they would do is the town would be destroyed perhaps by enemies or by fire or something like that, and they would just rebuild on top of the previous occupation. And the archaeologists are able to prove this or show this because some of these mounds are enormous, and they just, as they dig through them, they just find layer after layer after layer of occupation. So it's not a hill, it's a tell. Now this is referred to as a tell because there was an occupation on top of it, but obviously it's a 295-foot high hill and a very significant place. But the most significant part to me was understanding why God let Jacob win. He took the position of the lesser position and allowed Jacob to have the victory so that he could be blessed. And as Brother Kramer drew the parallel, the Lord Jesus did the same thing so that we could be blessed. And so I just find it a very interesting video, and I hope that it's been a blessing to you. And so Bowden, if you will cut the streaming off, and we will take prayer requests and have our time.